Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we examine a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is March 27th. On this day in 2009, a case shook the small town of Tracy, California, and made headlines across the nation. The heartbreaking murder of 8-year-old Sandra Cantu. It's a story that started as a desperate search for a missing child and came to a shocking conclusion. The crime was so disturbing that even seasoned investigators were left shaken. On March 27, 2009, Sandra, a happy, playful little girl, vanished from her neighborhood. The case took a horrifying turn when her body was found stuffed into a suitcase 10 days later. But what made this case even more shocking was the person responsible. A trusted member of the community who was someone that nobody would have ever expected. Today, we'll retrace Sandra's final moments, the massive search effort that followed, and the investigation that led to an arrest that no one saw coming. Let's get started. Sandra Renee Cantu was born on March 8, 2001, and grew up in Tracy, California. She lived in Orchard Estates mobile home park with her mother, grandparents, and 3 other siblings. Sandra was a bright, energetic little girl who loved playing outside with her friends. She had an infectious smile, a kind heart, and a playful spirit that made her beloved by everyone around her. She was in 2nd grade at Melville S. Jacobson Elementary School, where she was known for her friendly nature and bubbly personality. She was the kind of kid who would eagerly run up to her neighbors and tell them all about her day. Sandra's neighborhood was considered safe. It was the kind of place where kids rode their bikes freely and parents felt comfortable letting them play outside. But on this day, that sense of security was shattered forever. March 27th was a Friday afternoon, and like so many times before, Sandra came home from school, dropped off her backpack, and ran outside to play. At 3:54 p.m., a neighbor's security camera captured footage of her skipping happily down the street, dressed in her pink Hello Kitty t-shirt and black leggings. That video would become a crucial piece of evidence and the last time that Sandra was seen alive. When Sandra didn't come home for dinner, her family grew concerned. At first, they assumed she was at a friend's house. After all, she often played with other kids in the mobile home park. But as they checked in with her neighbors and no one had seen her, panic began to set in. Her mother, Maria Chavez, and other family members searched the area, calling out for her. They looked in backyards, they knocked on doors, and checked the nearby park. By 7:53 p.m., her family realized that Sandra was nowhere to be found, and they called the police to report her missing. The Tracy Police Department took immediate action. Officers arrived that night and began a door-to-door search. Volunteers joined in, handing out flyers and scouring the neighborhood. The search for Sandra quickly grew into a massive community effort. As hours turned into days, the town of Tracy was consumed by fear. Where was Sandra? Had she wandered off? Had someone taken her? The questions weighed heavily on everyone's minds. And then, 10 days later, the answer came in the most devastating way possible. On April 6, 2009, about 2 miles from Sandra's home, farm workers draining an irrigation pond discovered something that made their hearts sink. A black Eddie Bauer suitcase partially submerged in the murky water. Inside was the lifeless body of Sandra Cantu. The news was a gut punch. All hopes of finding her alive were dashed in an instant. The autopsy report later painted a horrifying picture. Sandra had been sexually assaulted with a foreign object, drugged with alprazolam, a powerful sedative, and ultimately died from asphyxiation. The discovery of this suitcase was the first real break in the case, and soon it led investigators to a shocking suspect, someone who had been right in front of them the entire time. As police sifted through evidence, one name strangely kept surfacing: Melissa Huckabee. Huckabee was a 28-year-old Sunday school teacher, a single mother, and someone that the Cantu family knew well. She lived just 5 doors down from Sandra, and her daughter was one of Sandra's playmates. At first glance, Huckabee seemed like quite the unlikely suspect. She was 1, a woman; 2, she was actively involved in the church, led Bible study classes, and had no history of violent crime. But investigators started noticing inconsistencies in her statements. First, she had reported a suitcase stolen on the same day that Sandra disappeared, and that suitcase matched the one that Sandra was found in. Which also, as a side note, this is so weird to me. Who in the history of the world has ever reported a stolen suitcase, like outside of an airport or something like that? Like, I cannot imagine what compelled her to report an Eddie Bauer suitcase stolen, especially because she obviously knew what was inside. Then there was a note. During one of Sandra's vigils, Huckabee claimed to have discovered a handwritten note that contained cryptic information about Sandra's body. This raised red flags as well. Witnesses also came forward and said that they had seen Huckabee's car near the irrigation pond on the day that Sandra vanished. But then came the most damning piece of evidence. Inside Clover Road Baptist Church, where Huckabee taught Sunday school, police found a rolling pin with a smear of blood. Testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Sandra. On April 10th, 2009, Melissa Huckabee was arrested and charged with kidnapping and murder. The community was stunned. How could a Sunday school teacher commit such a horrific act? Initially, Huckabee pleaded not guilty, but as evidence against her mounted, she changed course. On May 10th, 2010, she agreed to a plea deal, pleading guilty to first-degree murder and kidnapping in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. The rape charge was dropped. At her sentencing, she sobbed and apologized to Sandra's family. But Sandra's loved ones were not moved. Some of Sandra's family members were able to address the court, and they talked about their profound pain and loss. They also talked about the cruelty of Huckabee's betrayal, especially because after the murder, she pretended to mourn with them and even attended vigils for Sandra during the search. Following her sentencing, Melissa Huckabee was transferred to the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla, where she remains incarcerated to this day, serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. The murder of Sandra Cantu left an indelible mark on the residents of Tracy, California. Hundreds gathered for vigils and memorials. A makeshift shrine near her home overflowed with flowers, candles, and stuffed animals. But the case also brought attention to child safety and the rare but disturbing cases of female offenders in violent crimes. Sandra's mother, Maria Chavez, became an advocate for child safety and was determined to prevent other families from experiencing her same nightmare. Sandra Cantu should have had a lifetime of experiences ahead of her. Instead, her life was cut short by someone she should have been able to trust. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!